Hello and welcome to the B is for Brutal podcast episode 1. This is an MMA podcast that I've recently started just because my love for the sport has grown and the sport is growing and more people are watching it, and I'm just excited to share my love for the sport and just give weekly news to everyone about it. So let's get started. So the first thing I'll talk about is my favorite things about the UFC and MMA. So overall, I just really like leg kicks, stand-up combat, and it just motivates me to work out because everyone's just looking really strong and buff and muscular, and it just really motivates me to just get off the couch and stop watching them but actually go to the gym. So that's very motivating, and I just don't like a lot of wrestling on the ground. I like to just see a lot of stand-up combat, the punches, the kicks, especially leg kicks. Those are my favorite. It's always fun to see a knockout, you know? So next, my favorite fighters. So my first favorite fighter would definitely be Mike Perry, just because he's a pretty interesting character. He's got the face tats. He's in Florida. I love Florida. I recently just moved here, so that's pretty cool. And also, in one of his recent fights, when there weren't any crowds, he hired a guy to be his corner, just off Reddit, I think. I thought that was pretty cool, to where he didn't even have a coach or anybody there, just his girlfriend, and that's pretty ballsy in my opinion, and just out of the ordinary out there, and that's who Mike Perry is in my opinion, and I think that's pretty cool. I typically kind of end up more with those type of fighters who have a more explosive personality and just more fun. And then also in one of his recent fights, he just in his post-fight interview, he talked about taxes, and I thought that was pretty funny. Just wanted to not really be paid more, but just have the taxes taken out of his check beforehand. I thought that was pretty funny. Definitely gotta work on managing some money, but I just thought that was pretty entertaining. A rant of how he was saying he owed money to several governments. But he's a great fighter, and I'm sure he'll make more money and get that paid off, especially. My next favorite fighter is Justin Gaethje. He's one of my favorite fighters because he's a social worker, and I love anybody who does good things for the community, especially for children, and that's pretty interesting, and I'm glad that he's representing that career field. I think more people should be social workers and make a difference in our world. He's also a great fighter. We're going to talk about one of his fights later. That's pretty interesting. Lots of punches, and he just has a pretty good gas tank, and I love to watch him fight. It's always very entertaining. Next, Jorge Masvidal. I think he's the Post Malone of MMA because he wears his braids back, and he has a great personality. He's also from Florida. I think he's pretty funny as well, and I think he is a good fighter. So that's why he made the cut there. Next, Sean O'Malley. He's got the rainbow hair. He had a really funny vehicle. The Nissan Altima in this video he had where he shoots the basketball and misses it probably by 15 feet, but it's hilarious, and he's all about the 420. So he's definitely his own character, and he's a really good fighter as well. Just really talented and entertaining. So again, he makes the list for that. Next, my favorite fight. So definitely my favorite fight since I've been watching is Dan Hooker versus Dustin Poirier. That was really good. It was just lots of blows, lots of punches, very dominant fighters, and it was really tough to see who actually won that fight until the end. I was very impressed, and I definitely would have given that show a 5 out of 5, and you'll see through this podcast I'll rate the fights that I watched during the card, so stay tuned for that. But again, that was one of my favorite fights. If you haven't seen it, you should definitely check it out. You're in for a show, whether you're a new listener or a seasoned listener. Definitely check it out. Next, my favorite refs. So you probably wouldn't think in this podcast I talk about referees, but I think I respect referees. I think they're very important, and Jason Herzog, I think, is very professional. He does a great job. He's very attentive every fight, so he's by far my favorite. Next is Chris Tioni. He's very nice guy. If I was fighting, I definitely want him to be my ref. He's very nice with the fighters. Next, we can talk about my watching history. So I started watching MMA in about September 2019. My partner is really into MMA, and that kind of got me started watching it. My first fight that I actually went to go watch at a Buffalo Wild Wings was Dustin Poirier versus Khabib, and that was an awesome fight for sure. Dustin Poirier, he's a very good fighter, very skilled, always puts on a show. Recently he's been fighting Conor McGregor. They had 3 fights, and Very entertaining. He's a great guy. Did pretty well. He's from Louisiana, pretty close to where I'm from. I'm from Arkansas, and that was very entertaining. You should definitely watch it if you haven't. And Habib, he's 29-0 from Dagestan in Russia. He's an excellent fighter, never even bled in the octagon, and that's what makes him the best for sure. And we'll talk more about him as well. But that was UFC 242. If you haven't seen it or you haven't seen it in a while, definitely go take a look at it. It was very interesting to watch it. I was very excited. I was in a Buffalo Wild Wings, and the hype was crazy. Lots of fans in there, and it just really transformed my experience of what I thought about the sport. Just because I used to watch a lot of basketball and football, and those sports aren't very interesting to me anymore. And that's what really got me into MMA. I really enjoyed that experience, and that was a great fight for sure. Nobody's beat Habib, and it's just awesome to see him fight at all times. Unfortunately, he's retired, but we'll talk more about how he's still being involved with the UFC. So, news in UFC MMA. So, recently, like I talked about how Dustin Poirier has been fighting Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor's a pretty dynamic fighter. He's big on his brand. He sells so many pay-per-views, and he's really out there and a really crazy character. So he recently fought Dustin Poirier, who won again. He knocked out Conor McGregor for their second win that he's gotten in their fights. And Jake Paul gifted him a very expensive chain of Conor McGregor knocked out, and that was pretty funny. And the Paul brothers, I don't know, they've been fighting wrestlers from the UFC, like Tyron Woodley and Ben Askren, and they have their own little fight experience going on, and that's pretty interesting as well. Definitely another high-selling fighter. Definitely check that out if you haven't seen it. I don't have a date yet, but stay tuned and we'll talk more about that for sure. Next in news, Misha Tate. This fight was on recently as well. She came back from retirement after 4 years. She fought a while. She's in the women's division of the UFC, and that was pretty interesting. If you haven't seen that fight, definitely check it out. It's something you shouldn't miss. So it was pretty interesting, and she's a pretty decent fighter, and I'm excited to see her come back to the sport and build on her skills. Very talented. Next, Charles Oliveira to fight Dustin Poirier. We talked about him, and they're going to fight for that, and Charles Oliveira, very talented. Dustin's very talented. I'm very excited to see that. I don't know who's going to win, but I can't wait for it. Definitely check it out, and we'll talk more about that too in the future. Other things I'm looking forward to, like matchups and my predictions. I think on this next card, I'm excited to see Kyler Phillips fight again. He's very fast and entertaining, 9-1 record, and his opponent is coming from a higher weight class. And so I definitely could see him winning. That's my pick and prediction for that fight, is Kyler winning, just because his opponent's coming from a higher weight class, and he's going to have a little bit of a harder time adjusting to that versus Kyler's more experience in that. I think his opponent, I'll double check that, make sure I get his name right. I can't really pronounce his first name, but Pavia is probably his last name. That's going to be on the next UFC card there. And that'll be on July 24th, so just in a few days. So definitely check that out. That'll be pretty interesting, I think. On some other interesting facts about Kyler Phillips, he trains with Sean O'Malley, who is, I mentioned him earlier, very entertaining. He's a great fighter. Not a lot of people want to fight him, so again, I'm ready to see what that training has brought and how good that fight's going to be. Next, return of TJ Dillashaw. So, former pretty good champion. He fell to drug test, so he hasn't been in the UFC in a couple of years. I think 4 to be exact. But and then Corey Sandhagen, the guy he's fighting, is coming off of back-to-back knockouts. So that's pretty interesting, and I'm excited to see. And the winner of this fight may be looking at a title shot. So I'm excited to see how this fight goes out and see who wins, and I'm ready to watch that as well. So that's another fight that you should watch out for. And if I was a betting lady, I'd probably put my money on Corey Sandhagen, just because coming off back-to-back knockoffs and pretty talented. So next we'll talk about card summary. So the card I recently watched, I'll talk about my top 3 fights. I'll summarize them and give them a rating out of 5. So my number one fight was Islam versus Thiago. That was pretty interesting fight. I enjoyed watching it. Islam is Khabib's training partner and friend, so that's pretty interesting. They're both from Dagestan. Khabib again 29-0. They're in the same weight class, 155 lightweight, which I think is the most athletic, very stacked division and weight class. Islam is 20-1, so getting close to that record set by Khabib, and I'm excited to see what he's got for the next contenders and all that good stuff. I think it's pretty funny as well. He called out in his call just asking, why is no one going to fight him? And again, I wouldn't want to fight him. He's a pretty tough guy, and even when they asked if he was impressed with his opponent, he said he wasn't impressed by anything, so I appreciate that energy. So again, that was a top 10 fight. I definitely give it a 5 out of 5 for sure. Thiago got choked out, and that was just very entertaining, and I love seeing those guys fight. Number 2 fight of the night, Billy Clarencino versus Gabriel. So that was pretty interesting. That was the fighting night. They got the bonus of $75,000 each. You know, that's awesome. It was a very bloody fight. Gabriel never gave up, and it was one of the few technical knockouts that you'll see from behind. So that was also another interesting fight. You should check out if you haven't seen it. I enjoyed it. Definitely take a look out for yourself. Number 3 fight, Daniel Rodriguez versus Preston Parsons. You'll love this fight. This only went 1 round. Welterweight fight. Loves to watch those as well. And one of the first things I noticed was all the tattoos on Daniel Rodriguez. He looked like an inmate, and I think with the clinic he put on Preston, he probably should be in prison if it was in the streets. Definitely, it was a great fight. I enjoyed it. I love leg kicks, as I mentioned before, and I can appreciate a fight with a finish. So, very entertaining as well. I gave that fight a 5 out of 5 again. I loved it. And fun fact, Daniel Rodriguez has the second most amount of strikes in the UFC, and has fought every three months since he signed with the UFC. So he's definitely hungry. He's ready to fight, making that money, and I'm excited to see him fight again. So next, we'll talk about historic fights. This is another component of the podcast you'll see every episode, and we'll talk about Justin Gaethje and Michael Johnson. I actually rewatched this fight so I could talk about it more in the podcast, just because it's such a great fight. It went 2 rounds. It was actually Justin Gaethje's debut, and usually on a debut they don't have a 5-round fight main card, but for a reason, this was a pretty good fight. Justin Gaethje is very experienced, Michael Johnson as well. He's actually ranked 5th at this time. And I love this fight because there was lots of leg kicks, it was getting bloody, there was lots of stand-up fighting, and I really enjoyed a lot of punches exchange, and I just love to see that when it's not just in the center of the octagon, but also, you know, around the octagon as well, so that way they can get that long range. I really enjoyed it. And one exciting thing I'm really excited about is another component of the podcast is the knockout tally. So any technical knockouts or knockouts, I will be tallying those up for like the week, and also since I started the show, and eventually I'll do throughout the year, and that'll be pretty cool to keep up with of how many knockouts will there be. I love to see knockouts, and so this week there was 5, and so 5 from the start of the show. If there's anything you want to talk about or anything I didn't mention and you love for me to kind of touch on, definitely DM me on Instagram, and I'll leave that in the show notes. Instagram, Daisha Doll, DAYSIADOLL, Daisha Doll. That is my Instagram there. And one thing I kind of left out is usually I will be talking about The Ultimate Fighter, or the Contender Series, whatever is going on during that time on the podcast. I skipped it this week just because I didn't have enough time to prep. I'm definitely excited to talk about that as well. There's some great fighters in the Ultimate Fighter right now, and it is the return of the Ultimate Fighter, so there's a lot coming on, and definitely watch that. It comes on Tuesday nights, so check it out if you haven't watched it. There's a lot of good episodes and a lot of guys who have come out of the Ultimate Fighter and come into the UFC or even other leagues, which I'll get into as well, and it's pretty interesting material. So again, thanks for tuning into the podcast. This is the first episode. If you have anything you didn't like, send me a message, and again, I'm learning with you guys, and I hope we can build our love for MMA and the UFC here. So send me a DM, or rate the podcast and let me know what you think. All right, bye. Have a great week.